Bruce, you wrote an article in the National Post just recently in December, and it's very provocative in that it says so much in so few words. Conservatives don't know who they are or what they stand for. They're the party of hypocrisy. Conservatism and progressivism both need to be ditched. Liberals aren't liberal. In fact, they're progressive, which is a different thing. And something about a sweet spot, and I'll get to that later, but how do we reclaim, which is the gist of your article, how do we reclaim that word liberal, small L liberal? Bruce, why don't you start off?
That is the question, right? Because when people say liberal today, they have a certain idea in their heads about what that is. And I think that that idea is a modern one that has nothing to do with the original meaning of the word.
What is the original meaning?
Well, the original meaning of the word is really a political philosophy based upon the idea of liberty, as in being left alone by the state, people having control of their own lives and not being told what to think or how to behave, which is essentially the opposite of what liberal means now. If you talk to somebody about a modern liberal, you'll think of a lefty progressive who believes in extensive government programs and censorship and directives and high tax and spend. In so many respects, the modern version of liberal is the opposite of the classically liberal definition of the word.
It's long been a pejorative in the United States.
Indeed. If you speak about a liberal, on Fox News, for example, they mean that in a derogatory way.
Yes.
And so reclaiming the meaning of that word, to be clear, means that we're talking about the classically defined version of the term. When I suggest that the conservatives should be liberals, I do not mean that they should be liberals in the Liberal Party sense of the word. I mean the opposite. I mean the Liberal Party, I think, has abandoned the liberal space. And if you asked a member of the Liberal Party what a liberal was, I'm not sure that they would know.
He might say progressive.
They might say progressive. And the modern version of that word has come to sort of be almost synonymous with progressive. If you're progressive, then you can be a liberal, and those two things are not contradictory. The case I'm making is that those two things are contradictory. If you're a progressive, you are not a liberal.
Now, Salim, of course, you've spent many years in the Conservative Party of Canada, a strong supporter of them, recently changed allegiances, or should I say that they've changed allegiance to you, and you've gone over to the People's Party of Canada. What is a conservative in your mind? What is a small c conservative? Define that term before we proceed.
Yeah, before I proceed, it's a real pleasure to be with Bruce. It's wonderful that you set this up. And Bruce's National Post piece from a week ago or so was just a wonderful piece, especially for our readers, contemporary people, who in the universities and colleges in particular, and of course the general readers who read these things, set it out very clearly, which is what Bruce has just now said, that the word liberalism and liberal do not have any connotation or connection with what liberal and liberalism means in the historical sense, in the classical sense, and that's absolutely right. About myself, one thing that I think we can expand upon, when we're talking about conservative, we are talking about an institution. There's a conservative party, and not conservatism as an idea or as a set of principles.
Right, so what is that idea and set of principles?
Correct. Bruce has pointed that out right now, in the sense, indirectly, that the conservatives are the ones who adhere to, who are protective of the classical meaning of liberalism. That is, liberal as people who stand up for freedom. And there can be no meaning of freedom until there's a meaning of freedom based upon individual rights. It's the individual. And that's at the core of the classical meaning. And I would say that understanding this situation, talking about we are at the end of 2019, entering 2020, So this discussion is taking place at a particular space and particular point in time. Any discussion of this nature, of a historical event, or of an event which becomes historical, in the sense that has historical world, for instance, the election in December a couple of weeks ago in Britain, in more ways than one that we can speak about it, is a historical election. It was a landslide election. It was going to be one of the dividing elections. 2016 election of Donald Trump was a historical election as we go forward and we're looking back. So any of such discussion, I would suggest, needs to have a perspective at a minimum, as I tell my students, of 50 years. And the further you go back, the deeper becomes the understanding. It's almost, this is almost like, the deeper you look into the space of your telescope, the further you reach back, you're actually coming to understand the now of the situation. So this is not something that is new that has happened. This whole thing, distortion began 50 years ago, and you can stretch it back even back to the early 20th century, because it's not only the Liberal Party or the left, in that sense in Canada, the New Democrats, the Green now, whatever other mutation of parties that will emerge on the left or center left, claiming to be in some ways liberal, are actually not liberal, they're progressive. And that's what began in the United States, at the turn of the last century. 19th, 20th century. So Woodrow Wilson claimed himself to be progressive, And so the question then becomes, what is progressive? And that's, if we are going to restore, and it's of course primarily in our universities and colleges and schools where these discussions take place and all the journalists that come out of there, and what they're learning now is that the word liberal means progressivism. And they have lost that historical context. Few will go back and read Isaiah Berlin. Professors don't talk about it. The negative liberty, positive liberty, and four principles. So all of that has been lost. And if you're going to regain it, we have to get this bunch of people have that perspective. Otherwise, it's like the word gay that was lost in our lifetime. Now to say somebody is a gay person is not about that he's a jolly good person. Shakespeare would be coming and shaking his head. What does gay mean?
Now, Bruce talked about in his article the sweet spot is the space that the Liberals have long vacated, which is this small L liberal, smaller government, lower taxes, that area of live and let live, laissez-nous-faire economically. And he said, to win, the Conservatives must be liberals. Maxime Bernier, in my estimation, hit that sweet spot perfectly, which is why you threw your effort behind him. I threw my effort behind him. It's no surprise that you were in Gatineau at the first conference, speaking to candidates and delegates there. And why did he only get 1.6% of the vote if you're saying that if somebody hits this sweet spot, they'll win?
It's a good question. And I think Max is on the right track. In terms of the policy positions that he put forward. He suffers the disadvantage, of course, of having his own new party, instead of being in a mainstream party that is perceived to be one of the main choices. Hopefully, as time goes on, he will be able to become more mainstream and become more of an accepted choice for the run-of-the-mill voter who believes that he can go somewhere. For the time being, in this election just passed, the people who vote for a true liberal point of view, or for that matter, a conservative point of view, seem to have been persuaded that to vote for anybody other than the Conservatives was too dangerous, in a vote-splitting kind of way, to try and keep Justin Trudeau from regaining office, which of course happened anyway. So I think it's just a matter of voting dynamics rather than content. I don't think that the idea of the PPC is wrong at all. I think it's just a matter of trying to climb the mountain of being a mainstream choice, so that people are not making the choice they don't want to make in voting for the Conservatives just out of fear that Justin Trudeau might win.
Salim, your opinion on the fact that the Conservative Party, right now I'll say allegedly, though it's it has been stated by people inside of Warren Kinsella's group that the Conservative Party hired Warren Kinsella's group to slander Maxime Bernier and the People's Party with the epithet racist. What part do you think that played in pushing Salim out of this, Maxime out of this sweet spot and denying him at least his own seat?
Well, to the extent I would say very quickly that the general population, the voters, the electorate, they draw their information, their ideas, their views, both in terms of trying to understand the current situation and the discussion that is going on, or to validate their own established predispositions, on whatever issue that you want to take, Gender issues has become so prominent at the present time. The issue of multiculturalism in the Canadian context, or immigration and so on. And people have views about this matter, and either they're looking for validation about these views, or they're searching for what is the general understanding out there in the media that reflects the consensus of the country, so to speak. What is forgotten is the media, the corporate media, reflects the consensus of the elite, the establishment. And as I've been pointing out, in the case of Canada, in the case of the United States, the elite is a group of interest groups that can clearly be defined. The oligarchy, the business interest group, which has now gone global, and that is reflected in the elite. The academia, both of us are academic, that's an elite, they shape the generations that are going to come forward, so we carry an immense responsibility and burden. Yes, as we were shaped, and in some sense we are the ones that have walked away from the reservation of that consensus. But the other elite, the media is an elite, and of course the permanent bureaucracy that runs the country now. We know, at least in the case of the United States, and it's the same over here, same in Britain, the deep state, that is the permanent bureaucracy. That's an elite, and then the establishment political party that governs the country and have had their hands on the lever of governing. So it is a gathering. It's a group. Maxime stood outside of that. He was the first. Just like in the case of Donald Trump, he was outside of that consensus. So it is a consensus that exists at any given moment in time, which had its origin. We can trace it and go into the depths, into the weeds, and to find out how it evolved and so on. But it exists, and it is out there. So what happened in this instance that you are referring to, it is the elite that branded Maxime as a racist or anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and that thing stuck with the electorate because, as again Bruce has pointed out, and very correctly, and I was in the electoral process. I was a candidate. I was with Maxime. 12 months was a very short time to get a party established to run in a national election campaign right across the country. 338 riding. A lot of energy was invested in that in terms of Maxime and the core group of the party, which is a small party. It was a work in progress. A lot of energy was invested to deal with getting the architecture of the party in shape. And then once the writ was dropped, it was just 4 weeks of campaign, and that window was very, very narrow. The corporate media, or media in general, looked at PPC with almost a sneer, in the sense, who are these guys? Come along, and so they branded them. And the electorate, again, we didn't have the time to go around this matter and deal with it, have the debate, the discussion. We didn't have the resources. That thing stuck, and we went into that election with that branding that happened.
So how do you smash through that? How do you smash through that elitism?
Yeah, but that's something that I don't fall down. I don't despair on that matter. I mean, To me, they shot their 6 rounds of whatever is in the Colt 45, and they've done it. We have come out of it, you know. So what are they going to throw again, you know? The matter now is in the public arena. These discussions have to take place, you know. And so whether the progress will be by inches or by yard, that will depend upon our capacity to get the message out. But the message will get out in the sense that alternative media is out there. We will have more time, more town hall meeting, more public discussion, exactly what you and I are doing right now. And people will pause and think about it, and, you know, they'll take a second look. And I think the more these people brand us and not engage with us, that is the people, I'm not simply talking about the People's Party. Just take the issue of immigration, which has been the burning issue across Western democracy. It was an issue in the UK election. It was on the top of the agenda apart from Brexit. It is the number 1 issue or 1 or 2 issue in the American election in 2016 and will continue to be in 2020. And it was an issue right at the top in our election, in both the Ipsos Reid polling and the Ledger polling in the summer of this year, 2019, just a few weeks before the election. It was over 60% of Canadian polls said that the immigration numbers are too high.
Isn't it a somewhat classical liberal notion that people should be let alone? If they want to come to this country to be citizens, they should be allowed to. I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here, but isn't that liberalism? Come and join us. I don't care if you're 1 million or 10 million people coming, just like the United States was built by tens of millions of people coming in. Why would somebody in the sweet spot of small L liberalism be wanting to restrict immigration?
Well, may I jump in? Yeah. You know,
We both are jumping at the bit here.
You know, any proposition like the one you have made can be put into an equation. So there's an X and a Y. So one side of the argument you make, you know, it's freedom. People should come in. You know, they should have the right to come in, and so on and so forth. The other side of the argument, the Y side, is: are we a nation state or we are not a nation state? I will backtrack upon this matter and put it again in a larger perspective. You know, freedom is not simply the meaning of licentiousness or chaos. I mean, it was Edmund Burke who talked about it, ordered liberty. You know, there has to be, you know, a guardrail.
You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
You don't throw, well, all of that.
More or less.
But there is a guardrail. And here we go back to not only your question, to answer your question, go back to the very opening issue that we talked about, which we haven't gotten into, which we need to get into, progressivism. Because liberalism, liberal comes from the French word libre, you know, freedom, and we are talking about that, and it means nothing if it is not individual freedom, and that's what it goes back to. It was Russell Kirk, you know, the great American thinker, writer. His most famous book is The Conservative Mind, and the bulk of the book is on Edmund Burke. He made an observation which was remarkable. He said Burke was a conservative because he was a liberal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See, that's ordered liberty. Burke was observing, he lived through the French Revolution. His great book is a reflection on the French Revolution, right? And all of it comes out of that. You know? So if you parse the observation, Burke was a conservative because he was a liberal. In other words, Burke was trying to conserve freedom, not let freedom be dissipated, what he was observing in the context of the French Revolution, which is what became chaos, became Jacobinism, became tyranny, became authoritarian, became guillotine, all of that, you know, and he observed the whole process, which began with the rights of man. The same as the American Revolution, the Bill of Rights, you know, and the famous statement, the Declaration of Independence by Jefferson, you know, God has endowed us with unalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in the Jeffersonian term. You know, the Creator has endowed us. It is that unalienable right. It is not something that a state gives. It is the people who make the state, that is our order, liberty. We bring these rights from whatever source, you know, whether you are a deist, a theist, or you're not. It doesn't matter. It comes from outside. It comes from within. It is us. And it is to conserve that. That's the conserving what is ours, and nobody can take it away. That's the
So
negative idea of principle.
So you're not necessarily opposed to open immigration, you just say that it has to be
So
done
no,
in an
I'm sorry.
orderly
So
way.
we create an audit. So we create a state. And we say, we're going to control. I control, you control who comes into your house. And who comes into our house. That's our consensus. We are a free people. The other thing is freedom does not, or an ordered liberty does not exist in a universe as a given. It has to be constructed. It is to be. It is a process, a labor, an effort. So a liberal state, distinctively, a liberal or conservative state now, I mean, in that sense of the term, distinctly is different from a state that is of some other denomination or characteristic, a monarchy,
Yes.
I mean, in the famous classification of Aristotle, you had the three categories, the oligarchy, the aristocracy, and the democracy at the bottom of that. So, they're different states. So a very precise meaning there is an ordered liberty, and this is where it comes down to constitution. We write the constitution. And so we set the rules of who comes in and who don't comes in.
Yes, so let's put it this way. Liberalism is not a rejection of the state. This is not anarchy. In fact, liberals embrace the nation state for the purpose of keeping order. In other words, you need the state to preserve your freedom, to prevent people from imposing on your property or taking at you with a club. Progressivism, on the other hand, essentially rejects the idea of the nation state and thinks of the world as one globe. And in that world, it is easier to think of an open border as something that's sensible. In a liberal worldview, the nation state is a necessity. And in order to have a nation state, you have to have borders. And it is a completely legitimate thing, because the state has been produced by the people and elected by the people, that state should be acting for the benefit of those people. Not all people, those people. In other words, if you're in Canada, the Canadian government should act in the interest of Canadians, not the interest of the globe, the interest of Canadians. That means you have a border. And that means you have immigration, because immigration is good. But you have immigration that serves the purposes of the country, not the purposes of the globe. So this is an entirely different political philosophy than sort of an extreme anarchistic one or extreme progressive one that says, no, everybody can come in, anybody can go anywhere, all rights are owed to all people. No. The rights owed by the Canadian government are owed to Canadian people and to no other people until and unless those people are admitted in a proper process and become part of the inside and not part of the outside. So there's nothing inconsistent at all with the idea of a border and the idea of liberalism, in my view.
Furthermore, I mean, to what Bruce has contrasted the state and an open border world is globalism, which is what the struggle of the 21st century is. But it again had a big, you can go back and trace it back to its root. I mean, Marx, the people, the working class has no country or something of that. And the classic is now escaping my.
But that's interesting, right?
Manifesto,
I mean, just so that's very interesting because that's quite true.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that in this era, it is the working people inside these nation states who are the ones who are saying, not so fast. I mean, this is our country. We don't want to be globalist. We want our own place. We want our own culture. We want immigration, but we don't want to be overwhelmed. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make that.
And further, I mean, your interruption is very interesting because the original Marxist position, as laid out by Marx and Engels in Communist Manifesto, is the working class of the world has no state of their own or of that nature, and again it comes out of the French Revolution. People are in chain, and you have to break the chain, social contract, Rousseau, and so on. And so that was the debate of the First International. That's Marx and Engels, So that's the globalist origin. You might trace it back to mid-19th century, when the Communist Manifesto came out. And then you have the immense struggle, just to limit myself to this particular point, an immense struggle within that socialist movement, the First International, which splits up after World War I, because one side was arguing for that international revolution, which is in effect borderless world, and then the other side, as they split up, argued for socialism in one country, which eventually became, Stalinism and so on. But there it was, the argument that it has to have border, it has to have state, it has to have concrete, and the working class will defend their state. It's not about revolution. And you see, the cycle has now, in terms of the progressivists, the cycle has now turned back to the First International. It's a borderless world. And go and tell that to the Chinese Communist Party. Right? And so on. So these are the paradoxes and ironies that you have. And the big... And the people who are pushing the most, you might say, on the globalist argument in the Western world today, for instance, Angela Merkel in Europe, where she says all the European member states, you have to hand it over to the European Union, which is the globalist argument, and there is no nation state, that's obsolete. She has used the word out there, that's obsolete. There's another point I want to draw it out, and I like Bruce's thoughts on this matter, since he is both a lawyer and a constitutional lawyer, on this issue. Excuse me. Progressivists, in contrast to...
Is it still on? Is it still on?
It's still on.
Okay,
Progressivists, in contrast to the liberal, the classical liberal, the Burkean, the conservative, are distinctly different in the following sense. Burke, as Kirk points out, was a conservative because he was a liberal. You want to conserve something. You want to conserve your freedom. You want to conserve, protect, conserve. You say it's not an ideology. It's an instinct. It's human to conserve what you find sacred, or what you treasure, what you find beautiful. So you want to conserve that. So the bent of mind of the classical liberal or the conservative is to respect, if not revere, tradition and the past, and in the very particular sense, the Constitution, the constitutional order. You see, what is the sacred script in America, in a secular America? What is the sacred script? It is the Constitution. The battle is over the Constitution. How you read it, how you interpret it, how you implement it, how you enact it, etc., etc., etc. But there has to be a document, and that document is the Constitution that was prepared by the Founding Fathers 230 plus years ago. They were all what in today's lexicon would be the bad white men, the old white men. They were all slave owners, etc., etc. But it doesn't matter. That was a sacred literature, in that sense, secular, and that's laid down, and that comes to the nation state, and that's how you defend the country, we the people, and that's also the ordered liberty. The progressivist says anything to do with the past instinctively is abhorrent, is an abomination, is a stain, because by the definition of progressivism, it is the now, the present, and what the present leads on to the future in the hands of is the improved product of what was the past, the stain, the product that was, not proper, dysfunction, etc., etc. So the effort to override the Constitution. I mean, in the American politics, get rid of the Electoral College, and so on and so forth. So the Constitution is not revered, that's not protected, and whole sorts of different languages emerge on how you deal with the situation. In the Canadian case, it's the same argument. In the sense, we now have Charter of Rights and Freedom. Its origin is only now what? How many years? 30 years? No.
82.
32
so
years.
It's 38.
No, 40 years.
38 years.
It'll be 38 years, yes. So 38. But in the debate that happened in the patriation of the Constitution, the people who opposed it and the premiers who opposed Pierre Elliott Trudeau at that time, I think one of the key voices was that of Sterling Lyon of Manitoba, who argued that in the British tradition of which we are a part, there is no written constitution, but there is what is common law and precedence. That's the tradition, the supremacy of the parliament, revered institutions back to birth, and that's what you defend, that's what you protect, that's what you build upon. And people who don't share those traditions, who haven't had the opportunity of being schooled in that tradition or grown up in that tradition, either they have to learn that tradition when they come to Canada, we're talking about the immigrants, or we have to vet them whether they are people who are willing to live by our tradition. We all have a tradition. This is our tradition, but the progressives will rubbish that, and that's where the problem lies.
And so this is getting back to the Conservative Party. This is one reason that they've become schizophrenic, if I can put it that way.
I've said that they suck and blow at the same time.
They suck and blow at the same time because they are part of the establishment,
Yes.
and the establishment has become progressive.
Yes.
And so all of those globalist, illiberal, welfare state policies, so on and so forth, are part of the worldview that the Conservative Party has, because that's the way it's done within the establishment. On the other hand, they have a few leftovers of wanting to preserve traditional ideas and traditional institutions and traditional beliefs. And so they're both progressive and conservative simultaneously. And there are a few things that make less sense than a progressive conservative. It's insane.
Yes. Schizophrenic.
Right. And the spot that they're missing is the liberal one in between those two extremes.
That sweet spot.
That sweet spot. You cannot be progressive and conservative at the same time. And in fact, I would say that you can't be either progressive and win as a conservative, because there are other more progressive parties. You will always win. You will always lose that contest to the parties that are really progressive, more progressive than you. And they don't really mean their conservatism anymore, because they're part of the progressive establishment. So every once in a while, there's some utterance that suggests the shadow of their former selves as a real conservative group of people, but it's either hushed, or it's not genuine. So it just causes them a whole lot of trouble, as it did in the last election, right? So the thesis, going back to the thesis, is, look, you get to claim this territory that no other political party other than Max and the PPC is claiming. But to do that, you have to reject what the establishment now stands for. And that is one reason why it's going to be very difficult for the Conservative Party to do that, because it's against all their instincts. You want to be part of the establishment.
It's against their very name.
Exactly. It's against their name, and it's against their interests, in the sense that if it's in your interest to be part of the establishment, well, then the route to the establishment is not to adopt a truly classically liberal point of view, because it's a sign. This is a sign of how far we've come. That classically liberal point of view is now an extreme outlier in our political spectrum.
When I was running for the Canadian Alliance, at the same time that you were, Salim, in 2001, I remember at the door... 2000? I remember at the door people were afraid, quite literally afraid, that if the Canadian Alliance became the governing power, they would lose their OHIP, they would lose their CPP, their OAS, and all the social safety net programs they've come to rely on overnight. Like, it would be an abrupt change from the statist state that we have now to one of liberty, where you're responsible for your own actions. Shall I say the word progressive when it talks about the PPC reaching that sweet spot? It's not an abrupt overnight thing, is it? Because we've created this huge monolithic state that would require some sort of gradual,
of course,
progress
yes.
towards
yes.
small L liberty.
Well, can we just raise the issue with the word progressive first? I mean, that is the label, but it's And it's true that originally it was because this was the group that was open to progress, as opposed to trying to preserve what came before. I think progressivism is now as much of a misnomer for that constituency as liberalism is for the liberals. I mean, progressives are illiberal. They're authoritarian. They're statist. I mean, any one of those labels would be a better fit than progressivism. Progressivism sounds like a great thing. It sounds like you're making progress.
Yes.
Right. So I just wanted to raise my issue with giving them that label, the one that they want to use. But to your question about the transition from a heavily statist welfare state situation, you're absolutely right. This is not the kind of thing you do overnight at all. It would be not in the interests of your own people to try to get them to adjust from one situation to the next in an abrupt kind of way. That's not the way you do it. What you do is you identify and establish the principles upon which the state is supposed to function. Mm-hmm. And then over a reasonable amount of time, you transition from what you have to what you ought to have, so that people get what they deserve. People get what they've been counting on. They get what they have been planning on. Let's say you're talking about a person who's retirement age or close to it, thinking, well, I'm going to get CPP. Okay, well, that person has functioned for the past 30 years of his life thinking, well, I'm going to have CPP. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't do to suddenly overnight say, oh, by the way, you know that benefit you were going to get? No, sorry, you can't have that anymore. That number one, is not smart politics, and number two, it's not right.
No, it's a breach of a contract.
Well, right.
With the government.
Well, see, yeah, exactly, it is. Now, contracts can be broken by governments legally, and some I've made the case before that some kinds of contracts should be broken by government, but this is not one of them. On the other hand, you don't want to leave all of these systems in place. It's no good to be a surface liberal, to say, well, these are the principles upon which we really ought to function, but to actually put those principles into place would actually require us to change the way we do business in the country. So we can't really do that.
That would be a conservative.
That would be a progressive conservative.
Big C conservative.
A big C conservative, right? Exactly.
We have to define our terms.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Words.
Yes.
But before we get lost in the weed of these policy discussion, conceptually, I think we can frame it as follows. Conservatives are status in one sense, but status in the sense that they want to break the state down. We're now in the 21st century. The arguments of the elite in Western democracies and in Canada, pretty much, the elite is fully in that frame of mind, is globalism. That is a higher entity in a borderless world from where you derive your legitimacy of governing, legitimacy of policy, legitimacy, because there has to be some principle upon which your legitimacy rests. It doesn't rest on an empty space, on a vacuum. So for the progressivists, the legitimacy is that global entity from where they're looking after the planet. Whereas for the conservative, in that classical sense of a classical liberal, whether you are Jeffersonian, whether you're Burkean, whether you are, Johnny MacDonald and Wilfrid Laurier, it is the state. It is we, the people, as the American Constitution began. So your legitimacy, that is the legitimacy of the state, doesn't rest upon any elite, so to speak. It rests upon we, the people, and it is the institutions through which we, the people, speak about what we want. What we want is not something that is gifted to us by some entity standing up there like Santa Claus gifting it to us, the elite, the monarch, the United Nations, etc., etc. It's we want this, and we're going to achieve it by our savings, by our investment, by our revenue. That is by our work. Okay. So here's the
But
point.
we the people just elected
No, no, but,
Justin Trudeau.
what I'm driving at is it's very critical in our context where we are in. In the last 50 years, we can go further back. What has happened in Canada, as has happened in the United States, as has happened in Britain, and much of the Western European democracies, it is a phenomena across the Western world, where is the cradle of conservative liberal state, John Locke's social contract, etc., is that the state has become removed, the institution of the state has become removed from the people. That means there is a disconnect between the people. Take the clear example. The 2016 referendum, Brexit, was in June. The referendum was, the people made the choice. It was not an election. It was a clear question given to the people. You want to stay or you want to leave? And by a majority, the people say we want to leave. Now, all the parties, and therefore I would say conservative, Labour, Liberal, every single party in the British Parliament were in a sense establishment. They worked for the next 3.5, almost 4 years to nullify the people's referendum. Till again, through the long discussion we can come to, a new leader emerged, Boris Johnson, who pushed this issue of Brexit. An election happened, and the people ratified that election. That means the referendum by voting for a leader and a party that said, we are going to deliver you what you want, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the thing that was the great disruption. In the United States, this has happened. I would say that one quick way to handle it might not be the sweet spot. It might be a difficult thing, but conceptually, the 21st century politics, what we are now seeing, and Canada cannot remain an exception for too long or an anomaly, an aberration. It is a politics of counter-revolution. The conservatives and the liberals are counter-revolutionary. In other words, we want to restore the constitutional government. We want to restore we the people. We want to make the parliament once again the voice of the people, which it is not. The parliament has become almost the voice of the PMO and the prime minister. The 338 members, you can elect a lamppost and send it there. It makes no difference.
But what happens when you have a fair and open election and we the people decide that we want the elites? We want to be ruled.
Yeah, and some
we
people
want a Justin Trudeau blackface.
Some people have made the case that the populist phenomenon that has happened in the States and in Britain may not happen here, because the history of the country is different. The divisions are different. There are regional divisions as opposed to...
You're not talking about Canada.
You're not talking about Canada,
yeah.
Yes. And I don't know if they're right. I don't know if Canada is fertile ground for a populist revolution or not. I mean, you make a good point that in the last election, 65% of Canadians voted for the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens combined. Mm. And indeed, if you include the Conservatives in that lot as a progressive party, I mean, all the parties who have seats in the House of Commons are progressive. Yes. That's the case that I would make. And the one not progressive party, the PPC, didn't elect anybody. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go with the will of the people, well, the will of the people in the last round was pretty clear that they want to be progressive. Now, I hope that will change. I hope there will be another, as time goes on, seen to be by the rank and file voter a more viable choice than they seem to have perceived it to be this time around.
Does that point to a fundamental problem either with democracy or the makeup of this country? Because Salim and I just got through a series of talks about the checks and balances of the United States preventing the Nancy Pelosi's of the world from having their way with the people, while in Canada we don't have those same checks and balances, and you get a Justin Trudeau or a Chrystia Freeland or whoever in power, a Jagmeet Singh, and they have dictatorial powers, more or less. Very few checks and balances
here. But see, there's things to be said for and against both structures. the plus side of the American structure is that there are more checks and balances, and neither branch has control. On the other hand, in the parliamentary democracy system, you actually have somebody in charge who's responsible.
Yes.
Right? And if you actually need to get something done, you're much more likely to be able to do it in that system than you are in the US.
That's why Justin Trudeau likes China.
That's what
He says you can turn the economy around on a dime.
That's right. That's right. And of course, as time goes on, the case I would make is, unfortunately, as time goes on, the way we govern ourselves is converging with China instead of diverging from it. I mean, we still have a democracy, but in terms of the way we manage our economy and manage our people and censor our speech and watch over what's happening, I think we're getting to be more and more like China than China is getting to be like us.
Yeah, that's all very true. But you know, in our situation, what you say that we can govern and we can demand and we can get things done because of the parliamentary system of government. The executive and the legislature is in one house. And then the cabinet and so on. So we're not getting too technical about
Sure.
it. But the prime minister is both a legislator and
We're wearing different hats at different times,
yeah,
but
that's
yes,
right.
yes.
And in the American Constitution, which is very deliberately enacted, going again, not getting too technical, based on the notion of separation of powers, distinctly.
A much more
separate-
rigorous separation of powers in
Yeah,
the States
yeah.
than we have here, yes.
Correct. But both of them have the same problem. The problem is if the elite agree among themselves that we are going to make and work as such as one, then the people can be excluded. Both the American situation and our situation, in Canadian situation, that principle work. And in ours is much more effective in the sense, as you just pointed out, if you take the conservative, the progressive conservative, as part of all the other left-wing party, that means 99%, if 1.6% voted for PPC, 99 almost percent people voted for the authoritarian compact that exists, and it's becoming more and more so. But where lies the remedy? Where lies the situation? And I would argue that two arguments is over here. One is that in the case of the PPC, which was basically we were non-existent. We came at too little time and also put that thing out. There was no effective, over a period of time, there has been no effective, at least for the last 50 years, a political party that clearly stands out, defending the principle that we're talking about, where the people can cast a vote and say, we stand for freedom, we stand for conserving our tradition, conserving value. We are open. In fact, we want to have a discussion of immigration. I would argue that immigration is not a natural situation in the world, and the thing that people who argue it is naturally good, it is the onus upon them to make the case why it is naturally good. Because there's the other argument, which for all sorts of reasons people don't get into. One is being branded in the culture that has emerged over the last 50, 70 years, like post-1945, that the Western world, nobody talks about immigration in Japan or India or China, so it is a Western world, given the history of 2 world wars, Holocaust, and so on and so forth, then anyone who will talk about closed borders against immigration, without any further discussion, will be branded as a bigot. And so this is the scarlet letter that nobody wants to carry on you.
Right, so but can we go from there to the question of electoral success for the PPC and for the Conservatives, for that matter? So yes, the overwhelming majority of people voted for a progressive party. And I'm going to include...
Because there was no
That's what I mean.
no box there for them to vote.
But exactly.
Yeah.
So the thesis is this, that a whole lot of people who voted for the Conservative Party are not progressive voters. And they voted for the Conservatives because they perceived that there was really no other choice. And if that's the way things continue for the Conservatives, they're going to keep losing. Because the people voting for them don't really want to vote for them. Because the Conservatives are not really something that they believe in. They're just voting for the Conservatives because they don't want to vote for the Liberals or the NDP.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So
or they sit home. That's
Or this- right,
more than
yes.
1/3 of the people are not
Absolutely.
voting. You know, and
Right.
that number is increasing.
Exactly. So the case I want to make to the conservatives is, if you want to win,
Yeah.
then you better change your stripes.
And by conservative, you're talking small c.
I'm talking to the CPC. I'm
Oh,
talking,
okay.
if the CPC wants to win, they better stop being Progressive Party.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they better also stop being a conservative party in the retrograde sense. Because, if you watch the media, and I don't know to what degree the media was accurate, but let's assume that they were, that the references in the CPC goings on about, Andrew Scheer's anti-gay stance from the past was toxic.
Anti-gay marriage, I believe.
Gay marriage, right. So that pure conservative strain doesn't work either. You mean, imagine this. Imagine the Conservative Party said, right, we're not being progressive anymore. Let's just be full-blown conservative. We're against gay marriage. We're against assisted suicide. We're against marijuana. We're against all of these things.
Social conservative.
Social conservative. We're going to be a full-blown socially conservative party. Okay? That's not going to work.
That'll never work.
That'll never work. Right? So the only place you got left is this genuine, liberal, maybe conservative in the sense that you're talking about, in the sense of preserving the Western tradition of the way we do things.
Just hold it there.
Yes.
And I would like to qualify that.
Okay.
When you say, let's be wholly conservative or fully conservative,
Yeah.
this is where we stand. And you talked about marriage. What else did you say?
I said
Euthanasia.
gay marriage. I said marijuana. I said assisted
Okay.
suicide.
All right.
Yes,
Just-
right.
So I would say the conflation that is conservatism, I would say that would be in some way erroneous. That's reactionary.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I don't think. I mean, if Edmund Burke was sitting here,
Yes.
or Jefferson was sitting here, what was Edmund Burke's classic statement of being a conservative? That is a relationship with the past, holding the present for the future.
Uh-huh.
It is not wiping out the past.
Right.
So the decisions that have been made and the decisions that have worked, a conservative is not ideological in that sense. The decision that have worked. There was no income tax before World War I.
Right.
Income tax is now an established source of revenue for the state. I don't think any conservative in the 21st century will come around and say income tax should be now abolished, and so on and so forth. Medical sciences have gone forward, and so the debate about a STEM implantation or whatever that was, STEM research, that we should stop it, and so on. No. So it is not that conservatives are reactionary. The conservative is a position who wants to say, have the people agreed to this? Have they been advised? Have they been thought through? That means through the representation, through the discussion. That has been short-circuited. That's the disconnect. A conservative is open, sensitive, and leans forward to say, okay, here are our traditional values, these are our institutional values. If you want to change it, there are formulas to change it. In the constitutional formula, there's the amending formula. I mean, if you guys want to change the electoral college, then have the guts to come out and make the proposition, go through the process, and do it,
Okay,
As
so
we
let's...
said that we are not into anarchy, we are not into chaos, we are not into authoritarian, we want to get it,
So that's fair enough. Let's call those other policy inclinations reactionary conservative. But my point is that that's really all that's left over from the conservative, in the party sense, from the conservative point of view. The kind of Burkean conservatism that you're talking about is pretty much absent in the conservative party.
It has become absent because nobody has stood the ground. Take the Harper's tenure.
Yes.
Okay. We have talked about it, that if you bracket Canadian history over, say, 90 years, So we are in 2020, go back to 1930.
Uh-huh.
1930 was R.B. Bennett's government.
Right.
That was the last conservative government before World War II.
Uh-huh.
And then you have almost nothing, in the sense there are only 3 majority governments in a period of almost 90 years. John Diefenbaker, Brian Mulroney,
Mulroney,
progressive conservative.
Yep.
John Diefenbaker too was a progressive, or the party was progressive conservative,
Yeah.
and that's why Diefenbaker finally was kicked out of the party, or that long knives came out
Right.
against him.
Yeah.
You have Brian Mulroney, who was a completely liberal, who ran for the conservative.
Now, when you say liberal, what do you mean?
I mean progressive.
Right,
Progressive.
okay, all right,
Thanks,
good.
thanks. And then you had Harper,
Yeah.
Joe Clark, you can just
Sure.
write him off,
Yeah.
So take the latest iteration of Harper. What was it that he did in his decade that one can say was a Burkean conservative thing? There was not one legislation, not one thought, not one principle.
Right.
Take the case of marriage. It was during his term it came on. I don't know where you stood on that ground, Bruce, but these guys just went along and changed the whole thing and adopted same-sex marriage.
Right, but you see, same-sex marriage is a very good example to distinguish between the progressive, liberal, and conservative view of the world, I think, right? So the progressive view is, well, we should not only have gay marriage, but we should promote gay marriage. It may become mainstream. You must accept this. You must embrace it. If you don't embrace it, then there's something wrong with you.
Right.
The conservative point of view is gay marriage is not a good idea, because it's not. We should defend the traditional notion of marriage. It is the state's job to defend the traditional version of marriage, the traditional notion of family. The liberal version of this is, the pure one, is the state shouldn't be involved in marriage. If you want to marry somebody in a church, go ahead. Do it by your own rules. Marry whom you want. If it's a man and a woman, that's fine. If it's a man and a man, that's fine. It's got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with the state. It's got nothing to do with other people. Go and do what you want, but don't require us to participate in it, because it's nothing to do with us. It's your life. It's not ours. Okay? You have 3 distinct approaches to that same question. And the middle one, the one I've just described, is nowhere to be seen on the political landscape in Canada. There are still leftovers of the conservative view that marriage should be between a man and a woman. That is dead, politically dead. That you go nowhere with that. I think Andrew Scheer's experience shows that. The progressive view is, if you're not in favor of this, then you are a bad person. You're required, essentially, to endorse the idea. That's not acceptable either.
They're forcing ministers and priests
Exactly.
to perform these marriages.
That's right. That's not a free country.
Yeah.
The free country is this place in the middle that says, do whatever you want, but don't ask me to take part.
See, philosophically, the liberal position, as you have defined it,
Yep.
is very eminently defensible, and there is no problem with it. I would say that what you have defined as conservative is actually the reactionary principle.
You would say, right, I understand.
And
yeah.
then there is the progressive principle.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Look, in the 1990s, this issue erupted in America in a big way.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And so the people were involved in the discussion. And so the Congress passed the Defense of
Marriage Act. Yes, correct.
Right? And the progressive presidents, they signed on to it. That's Bill Clinton most
Right.
prominently.
Right.
And then
Right.
Obama.
But here's the one thing that the progressives and the conservatives do have in common. They think these decisions should be collective decisions. In other words, as long as there's...
It through the institution, not collective.
Co-
I would
but-
say institution.
Well-
It went through the Congress. You see,
But that's what I mean. But I'm including institutions. When I say collective, I mean either democratically or institutionally. In other words, it is a decision for the group to make together in some kind of deliberative way. And if that is done, then the decision is okay. And that is not the liberal view. The liberal view is, I don't care what the group thinks. Go and deliberate and decide whether you like it or not. I don't care.
But that's
Leave me alone.
But
is
that's
the
where you
liberal
fall
view.
into the paradox and the conundrum, Bruce.
Right.
That is, where is the state? Because as we already talked about the ordered liberty.
But you see what we're getting at now.
No, but that's the discussion that was needed to be had. Take the case of one of the most quote-unquote progressive countries in the world, in Western Europe, France.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
In France, this debate happened in the 1980s and 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and through the French Assembly, the National Assembly, this was settled. The traditional marriage is traditional marriage, and then there is the union. They gave a clear distinction between marriage and a union between two women, two men, whatever you want. That's your choice.
Right.
Once you've done that, I think the implication, and this is where your legal expertise come in, the reason that this had to be discussed out and the people had to come in, that is the state had to come in, through the institution of the state, because we are not living in a situation of what we will by ourselves individually. You see, there are pension rights, there are job rights, there are employment rights, there are your welfare rights, and etc. Where state comes in.
But you see,
insurance.
But what we're getting at, now is the nub of the difference, the actual difference between liberals and conservatives. Okay, at bottom, conservatives are still a philosophy that believes in the collective. Believes in collective decision making, believes in collective institutions, whether it's state or family or church or insurance, it's a collective idea.
The individual be damned.
This is the individual be damned. So if you're in France, the decision has been resolved. Liberal says, what are you talking about? I don't agree. And it's my life, I will do what I like because it's none of your business. Whereas this might be the one thing that the progressives and the conservatives have in common. They are both about the collective. Now, they have very different views about what the collective should decide and what the proper thing is. Collectivists, right? So there are many ways in which small C conservatives and small D liberals today see eye to eye. I mean, they're both in opposition to this illiberal authoritarian thing that's happening. But when you really get to the bottom of the difference, there is this fundamental difference in worldview about where legitimacy comes from. And legitimacy, I think, for a conservative comes from a collective understanding. And legitimacy for a liberal, although they believe in the state to protect that individual liberty, it is the individual who is the ultimate decision maker in the liberal worldview, and the collective be damned.
The difference or the distinction that you're making between the individual and the collective on the conservative side. On the progressive side, I would say the progressives are collectivists.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I said, go back to Marx and Engels or the modern, progressive, and for them it is the diktat. They know best. The definition of collectivism is that there is somebody who knows best, and he will impose that decision.
Yep.
And for the conservative, no, it is not collective. It is institution which has been freely arranged. Just like a marriage between two individuals. We're not getting into gender here.
No, right.
But it's not coerced. It's freely arranged.
Right.
There are marriages that are coercive. I mean, you go back to the collectivist society, that's third world.
Yes.
So we're talking about modern and pre-modern world.
Right.
Modern and pre-modern culture.
Right.
So marriage is a coerced act. The individuals have no choice in the matter, who they marry and so on and so forth. Which is the most important decision any individual can make, your partnership for life.
Right.
And that is, take the Middle East, take the Arab world, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
The whole problem of misogyny and women, that's the collectivist culture.
Right.
But conservatism, in the Burkean sense, is not collectivist, it is individual. We freely gather together and we become People's Party.
Right, I'll grant you that.
We're elected to the parliament, and then we speak. Remember the Burkean principle: you elect me, but I am not your echo.
Right.
My burden is to give you the fullness of my knowledge,
Right.
wisdom, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Whereas we are electing people in a counter. This is the collectivism of both the progressive and the liberal progressives.
Okay.
They are electing members of the parliament who are denuded of their individual voice.
Agreed.
Right?
Sure.
So I would say on the issue of marriage, it became such a hot button issue, and it became, on whatever is our personal choice, we can put it on the table. But setting it aside for this discussion, the debate, the conservative, and this is where we began with what did Harper do?
Yeah.
There was no discussion. There was no reaching out to the public that this is an issue. Whether it was in 2006 election, 2008 election, this is a conservative platform. We are going to defend the marriage, or we're not going to defend the marriage, or we're going to go in different day, we're going to create a dog's breakfast out of it. There was none of that.
But I don't think that conservatives, small c conservatives
Yes.
now, would like the idea. Let's say a classically liberal government is elected, and they say, we're going to take the state out of the business of marriage. There'll be no such thing as legal marriage anymore. You go and do what you like. If you want to go to a church that you belong to voluntarily and you want to get married according to that church's rules, then great, go ahead and do what you like. But as far as the law is concerned, there will be no such thing as marriage. My suspicion is that a lot of small c conservatives would be appalled at that idea because they think the institution is worth defending, because it is a thing that has carried us a long way over a long period of time as a civilization, and on that basis alone, it is the kind of thing that conservatives wish to defend. I don't have any problem with defending it as long as you do it voluntarily, but I think their inclination is to look to the state to defend the strength of the institution of the family and of marriage.
I think what you're saying is
but
that
the
there is a
state-
spectrum of small c conservatism, some which might tend to believe that, some might tend towards the smaller liberal side.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a
Yes,
spectrum.
yes,
It's
sure,
like people.
sure.
The politics is messy. There's a
Absolutely.
spectrum.
But,
Yeah,
but the
right.
state, a democratic state, is not an alien state. It is a state of the people, by the people, for the people, in that
Sure.
classic sense,
Right.
right? So asking the state or leaning upon the state, as you have phrased it, I would say it the other way. It is through, in the parliament, it is the parliament taking the responsibility. That's our institution. And a small c conservative, whatever the numbers are, it's a segment of our population. From a conservative, as a Burkean conservative point of view, which is basically liberal in that classic sense,
Yep.
would respect that view, because again, that is an articulation of a legitimate interest, value, culture, tradition of the people. And it's a job of a democracy is to bring together all these various views and find the sweet spot, the harmony. In the economic sense, is the price equilibrium, right? You come to.
I think we've come to the sweet spot in this particular discussion.
No,
and,
but-
and
but-
have to end it here because time prohibits. Maybe next time we can continue on about liberalism, conservatism, and
Sure.
the sweet spot of liberty. Thank you both, Salim,
Thank you.
Bruce.
Thanks,
very
Robert.
much.
It's great.
Thank you.